Hello again, and welcome to the Creative Writing Podcast. The theme of today's episode is Blissful Solitude. You'll need a pen and paper or the notes up on your phone or maybe a new Word document. The first few minutes will be a writing warm up, and then I'll talk a little bit about why I chose the topic, why it's interesting for writers, and we'll get to the main writing session. During the writing sessions, I'll talk about every 2 to 5 minutes to give you a chance to concentrate. Some people really need quiet to concentrate. The idea of this podcast really is that I keep track of the time so that you can concentrate on the writing. And towards the end of the main exercise, I'll just give you an opportunity to press pause. So obviously you can carry on longer if you like. And at the end, we'll all come together again and we'll concentrate a little bit on reflection and learning and making our writing craft better. So let's jump straight in then with a warm up. Here is a phrase, and you can write any response to this phrase that you like. Do remember that this is the warm up. The idea is that you experience a sense of momentum. So just keep putting words down on the paper, even if they do not form coherent sentences or are a jumble of ideas. If they come out in dialogue or description or second person or first, it completely doesn't matter at the moment. The only aim of the next 5 or so minutes is that you go from not having words on the page to having some words on the page. The phrase for today is the meaning of true happiness. So, once again, you can respond to that in any way that your brain wants you to. The meaning of true happiness. Hopefully, this has begun to take off for you. If it absolutely hasn't, then I'd invite you to write a list. You can list all of the things which mean true happiness for you. And in the last 30 seconds, we can think about ending somewhere very intentional, the end of a sentence, the completion of an idea, a pause in an exchange of dialogue. And if even this small phrase has kicked something in your imagination, sparked something in you that you want to respond to, then obviously press pause and just keep going, because you have to catch those waves when they come. If you'd like to carry on with the session, then yeah, we'll absolutely get to that now. So today we're going to talk about blissful solitude. Um, it, Today's session is going to be a little bit about interiority. Um, Sometimes humans can find it a massive relief to be alone, but also being alone allows us to pause and reflect. And that's why some people find it, absolutely terrifying. And in some ways, today's podcast is a companion piece to last week's, which was all about kind of the horror and creepiness of being suddenly alone. And today, I'd like us to lean into how being alone can give your character an opportunity to think, pause, collect themselves, understand the world they're in, um, come to a better understanding of what it is they're looking for or what they might have to do next. So, if we imagine a person who has been controlled, and you might make notes on this for the piece we're going to write today, you may imagine that they've been controlled by their family. That's a very common experience. And that comes up a lot in young adult fiction, because those young adults are at the point where they're going to step away from their family, whether they're allowed to, at which point they want to, what the expectations are when they do. Those are real parts of almost everyone's human experience, that are really usefully explored in young adult novels and help young adults going through that to recognize, where the challenges are, the fact that these challenges are for everyone and that almost everyone has to overcome them. Um, but we might think about the workplace as somewhere that people want to escape from, the kind of tyranny of our colleagues and those kind of expectations. Um, we might also have everyday societal expectations, which everyone else thinks are fine, but that we struggle with personally. And that can be the theme of romantic fiction, literary fiction, but I think it's also really present in romance, in that there's this idea in the romantic novel that people want to find love and get married, and but often at the beginning they're committed to being alone, and it's actually stepping away from that idea of having given up on love and marriage that the romance is trying to overcome. um we might also think about our own rules and expectations. They sometimes we set ideas of how we're going to behave in society or what our role is in any certain situation. And it's not really until we step away and are completely alone that we can question, why did I expect myself to behave in a certain way? Or why is it the rule that I'm always the person who has to sacrifice everything? So there's that element of being alone in stories as well. And then, of course, we might get all the way to, an incredibly oppressive society, where people's thoughts and everyday actions are highly controlled. And stepping away from that is just an attempt to have a little bit of freedom. And we would find that a lot in dystopian fiction, or actually even in political fiction that attempts to address, the relationship between the individual and the government and the society that they live in. So let's have a think about our writing for today, and maybe one of those types of being alone has grabbed your imagination and given you a little bit of a clue to where you want to start. I'd like us to imagine a beautiful place. I'm going to lean into the beauty of landscape today. It can be a place that's real. If you have a favourite beach or a mountain that you visited that you'd like to set this in, then absolutely go for it, because what it can do, and what I find that sort of thing does for me, is that the concreteness of that place is locked in my mind already, and so I'm trying to communicate it through language, but I'm also not trying to imagine it and then communicate it through language. I can really see it in my mind's eye. I also know that the geology of and the weather of that place will make sense to my readers, because it really exists. There's something different about being on a chalk landscape than there is a volcanic one, and it's easy for your mind to jumble up different places. So if you want to locate this somewhere you've been, then absolutely do so. As ever, you can drop a character into this writing session who you're working with on a longer piece, or you are trying to get to know well. It can be a good idea for a main character, or for a side character in a main novel who doesn't generally get much of your attention and who comes across a bit flat. Maybe you would like to spend some time with them today and see how their interiority develops, even if it doesn't end up being in your longer piece. If you don't have any characters that you're working with, absolutely fine. Choose a name and an age for this person, and we'll discover all about them as we write it. Discovery writing is pretty much what we're up to here. So, your character has gone for a walk, and they will find themselves in this beautiful place. Whether or not it's familiar to them is completely up to you. Perhaps it's brand new. And we'll begin our writing session with your character concentrating on themselves rather than the landscape around them. And we're going to begin with the idea of a weight being lifted. So let's spend a few minutes on that. We're going to have your character in a beautiful place. We're going to concentrate on the idea of a weight being lifted. And now, if they've experienced that sort of sense of relief, that moment of freedom, that realization that they're on their own, that their thoughts and their time is their own at the moment, let's turn their attention to the place that they're in and perhaps begin by giving the reader a sense of scale. So, am I in a tiny, kind of close woodland glade with lots of things around the character, or am I being transported to, the top of a mountain with a view over fields and towns and cities in the distance? Let's have your character, as part of their realization that they're alone, realize the place that they are in, but begin with scale. And now, as part of their experience of this place and this moment of blissful solitude, perhaps your character fantasizes about staying forever. Perhaps they get quite practical about this little fantasy. How would that landscape work for them if they wanted just to stay in this one place, blissfully alone for the rest of their lives? And now perhaps this will make sense for what you're writing, or perhaps it won't. So do feel free to ignore me if this doesn't work for you. But they may wish to consider which relationship they would be most glad to be free of if they were going to stay in this place forever. Which relationship they'd be most glad to be free of? What person do they never want to see again? And if your person has been ruminating on that for a while, and again, you can ignore this if it doesn't work for you, perhaps thinking about what they'd be glad to be free of brings them to the realization of what they would miss if they were to stay here forever in this blissfully wonderful landscape completely on their own. So maybe some of their difficult life with its expectations, responsibilities, rules is actually fulfilling, and they would actually miss some elements of it. And now perhaps they would like to turn their attention away from themselves again. And to help this, they're going to watch something unfold in that landscape. Something is going to happen in this beautiful place where they are. It might be as simple as watching a bee land on a flower, or a cloud race across the sun. What it is entirely up to you. I'm not fishing for something overly dramatic, though. I'm just allowing your main character, who's been thinking about themselves and their experience of the world, to turn their attention to the things going on around them, the normal, everyday experiences of existing in this landscape, for it to be tactile, for them to hear things, for them to see things. And as we come into the final couple of minutes of today's writing session, if you like, this blissful solitude might be broken by the arrival of another person. Your main character for this piece of writing might know this new person, or they may not know them. This might be their first meeting. That might fit with where your brain is at and what you're doing. You might have been waiting for this moment, thinking, gosh, this is boring. I need this person to meet someone and begin fighting with them and having conflict and establishing that character dynamic. But you may not have been, so you can ignore me. But if you like, last couple of minutes, the solitude is broken by the arrival of somebody new. And if these writing prompts have kicked something off in your imagination, then now is the time to hit pause and stop listening to me. If you only knew you had the 45 or so minutes of this podcast, then we'll just spend the next 30 seconds or so finding a place to come to a deliberate halt. It might not be an end. It might be by summing up some ideas that we're going to carry on with. It might be by recognizing the objects in that landscape that your character really needs to turn their attention to that they haven't noticed yet. Might be by sketching out how the relationship between the two characters who are now in this scene might develop. It might be by simply finishing an observation or an idea. And now I'm going to invite you just to put your pen down, pause your typing, give your brain a bit of a rest, and we'll just have a bit of a reflection about what we've managed to do over the last half an hour or so of writing. Today we were really looking at the relationship between character and landscape. We really want our characters to be part of the world that they exist in. We really want them to, we as readers want to know that these characters really couldn't exist anywhere else. Readers want to be immersed in a place, even if you're writing a book set in very familiar landscapes for your readers, like modern day cities. You shouldn't imagine that they're not interested in those landscapes just because they're not kind of new, enormous fantasy worlds built on entirely different rules. They still want to feel that they're really there. I'd say that with setting in particular, first draft can really be a sketch, and then subsequent drafts become an oil painting. That doesn't mean that you'll be filling in every single detail of every single place, but that you'll be very conscious as you rewrite about where light is coming from, what the weather is, and what your character is doing there, and why them experiencing an emotion or first having an idea or coming to a realization in this specific place was important to them. Perhaps it's the solitude of somewhere peaceful that allows them to reflect on their life and their decisions. Or if you did last week's podcast, perhaps it's the kind of scariness of being alone, the fear of it, that allows them to notice things about their world that they wouldn't have done before. As always, I'd suggest that when you read back, you have an eye out for a turn of phrase, a beautiful line of dialogue, an interesting thought or description, and you can star those in the margin or highlight them or underline them. And really, the idea of that is that as writers, we develop writers' notebooks full of ideas. Some of those half formed ideas might become short stories. Some of those ideas and passages might be included in novels. And on the days when we sit down to write and we want to write, but we're not sure what we're going to write, having a notebook that reminds you of some of the things that you are proud of can be a real inspiration in terms of making you write more. And that's why I quite like that as a practice. That said, I mean, my own writer's notebooks are in complete chaos. So it's do as I say and not as I do technique, that one. And you also might want to read through for the germ of an idea. Perhaps there's something in this piece of writing that your character actually needs to experience in an entirely different place. Or perhaps you will really place focus today and you've invented somewhere, but this character doesn't fit there at all. And what you'd like to do on your own in other writing sessions is to revisit this place and see where its edges are, explore it further, but perhaps with someone entirely new going through something different. I think, especially when you're a beginner, it can be tempting to imagine that all your pieces of writing fall onto the page complete, but sometimes what you need to do is break elements of them apart, carry on with something that works, leaving something that doesn't. So the character you've invented today might be quite a boring person that you don't want to spend much time with, but their role was to introduce you to somewhere. Or perhaps the place doesn't work, but the character is an interesting one to carry on with. Remember, one of the joys of writing as an art form is it's actually not very difficult compared to, say, sculpture, to break it all down and start again. So you might take a single word or a tiny phrase or a moment from today's writing to use in your writing again. So that was a little bit of writing on Blissful Solitude. I hope you really enjoyed today's podcast. If you did, you can go back and do last week's one as a kind of companion piece. That one's Suddenly Alone. So kind of very much on the same themes, but very much a different approach. And I hope to see you again next time.